I'm Professor Linda Milter, and we're going to have our first Business Society meeting. Some of you may know that we have changed the name to honor Vicki Kasomenakis, who passed away in August 2014. So it's now the Vicki Kasomenakis Business Society. And it's our first meeting of the whole year, and a kind of a special one. Karen Dahlberg, who is a staff attorney for the Federal Trade Commission. How many of you know what the Federal Trade Commission does? Okay, you will in a few minutes. Came to us a couple of years ago, I think it was 2011, somewhere right. There. Karen has been working at the FTC for 6 years after several years of working at a Wall Street law firm. And so she comes with tremendous experience, but I also know firsthand the interesting topics that are covered, that Karen covers. Last time we did identity theft. This time we're going to look at cybersecurity and privacy. So please give a warm welcome to Karen Dahlberg. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. I'm really happy to be back here again talking to you guys. I don't know if anybody was here last time. I know our videographer was here last time when I came here and spoke about identity theft. Was anybody else here? Nope? Okay, that was a while back. Anyway, today I'm going to talk to you about cybersecurity and privacy. And before we get into the meat of the discussion, I would like to tell you a little bit about the FTC, a little bit about me, and then I'd like to find out a little bit more about my audience. So first of all, what is the Federal Trade Commission? The Federal Trade Commission is an independent agency of the United States government, and what that means is that we are independent from the president. When Obama was elected, he wasn't able to replace all of the heads of the Federal Trade Commission. I didn't have to worry about losing my job, things like that. And the president does appoint the commissioners, and the commissioners serve for a period of approximately 7 years. And they can't all be from one particular party group. So even though Obama is a Democrat, and you might think that he would want to appoint all Democratic commissioners, he doesn't have that option. We are an independent agency, and so there needs to be some balance at the top of our agency. And so although the president does get to appoint people, these appointments don't expire at the end of each presidential term, and the president cannot only nominate people from his or her own party. What we do is we are a regulatory and an enforcement agency, and we deal in areas of consumer protection and antitrust. When we were first set up in 1914, it was primarily for antitrust purposes. And I don't know if you've heard of the term trust busting, but basically the FTC was responsible for breaking up large monopolies such as Standard Oil and other huge companies that were around during that time period. Since then, our agency has really morphed in a number of different ways. We still work in antitrust, and we still target monopolies and try to break them up. We review mergers to make sure that huge companies can't get together and create monopolies that would be harmful to consumers because they would be able to raise prices or restrict supply and that sort of thing. We also do consumer protection work. That's something that our agency has done a lot of since the 70s. We do that by engaging in enforcement actions. We are a civil agency, not a criminal agency, so nobody goes to jail because we sue them. However, they can lose a lot of money, and that's really a good reason for companies to follow consumer protection laws and to make sure that that they follow our rules, regulations, and our advice. We cover areas such as credit, privacy, advertising, spam, and use of the internet. We are responsible for the do not call list. Some of you may be too young to remember when we all had landlines and there were these terrible telemarketers who would just call and call and call and call, and there seemed like there was nothing you could do about it. Well, then the FTC started the do not call registry, and if you're not already on it, you should get on it. It's donotcall.gov is the website. And that really kept people from being harassed. So we are looking at making sure that we can protect consumers from unfair practices, from deceptive practices, and from general harassment. So I mentioned deceptive and unfair practices. What Section 5 of the Federal Trade Commission Act does is prohibit unfair or deceptive acts or practices that are in or affecting commerce. So deceptive practices are when a company engages in a practice that fools you. For example, if you're looking online and you see an ad that says that there's a free trial for some kind of a weight loss pill or a muscle enhancing supplement or something like that, and it says you just pay $4.99 for shipping and handling or something like that. And you think, oh, that sounds great. I'd love to do a 14-day trial of this diet pill, whatnot. And you give your credit card information for shipping and handling. You expect to be paying $4.99, but that's it. And lo and behold, 30 days later, you see there's a charge for $100 on your credit card bill. And you have no idea what that's about. And you ignore it, thinking you probably went on a crazy shopping spree and forgot about it. And 30 days later, same thing. You see another $100 charge. Well, it turns out sometimes these free trial offers are not really free. And what these companies do is they enroll you in a continuity plan, which is where every 30 days, until or unless you cancel, you get billed. So that's an example of deceptive practices, where you've been tricked into something through false advertising or inadequate disclosures, things like that. Now, unfairness is a little bit different. Unfairness is where there's an act or practice that could cause or is likely to cause substantial injury to consumers, and there's no countervailing benefit to consumers or competition. So an unfair practice would be something where there was nothing that you knew about this practice. There's nothing you could have known about this practice. Has anyone ever been a victim of unauthorized billing, where there's just been a charge slapped on your credit card and you didn't know why? Does anybody know that? So that's an example of an unfair practice. It's not where you were tricked into making a purchase, but it's where someone just somehow got a hold of your information and charged you. So generally speaking, what we do is we at the FTC is we enforce Section 5 of the Federal Trade Commission Act, which prohibits unfair and deceptive trade practices. And how do we do that? We file lawsuits. We investigate companies, and when we find enough evidence of wrongdoing, we bring an action. It's a civil action, and generally we don't get fines. What we get instead is restitution for consumers, meaning that if consumers were scammed out of $30 million, then we sue that company to get the $30 million back. And ideally, if we get enough money back, we distribute it among consumers. We have some rules that are in place. One of them, for example, is the telemarketing sales rule, which has certain rules in place in terms of what hours of the day telemarketers can call you, what they need to disclose, what kind of information they need to save in terms of showing that you've actually agreed to the charges that have been made, that sort of thing. We also do some workshops and studies which supports proposed legislation that we forward on to Congress. Okay, so today we're generally going to talk about privacy, data breaches, applicable laws, and what people do with stolen information. So before we get to that, I told you I would tell you a little bit about me. So my name is Karen Dahlberg. I've been working at the FTC for almost 6 years. I work in the Bureau of Consumer Protection, and I have brought a number of different cases against companies. One that's still in active litigation was against a medical discount card company. This was a company that was selling people medical discount cards, but marketing it as insurance. So this was a deceptive claim where they were telling people they were buying health insurance, and people couldn't resist this very low price, thinking that they were getting real coverage. And unfortunately, what they got was just this card that would, at best, get them 30% off of certain medical services if the card was even accepted. So that obviously caused a lot of harm to consumers. So that's one case that I worked on. Another was an unauthorized billing case where there was an online clothing retailer that was seeing hard times and decided that rather than use lawful means to try to improve sales, they would just charge people a random $49.95, $59.95, $69.95, whatever they thought consumers wouldn't notice. And then they later made up this story that consumers had signed up for a frequent shoppers club when there was no proof of that, and consumers didn't remember that. So we shut down that company. I'm currently involved in an active litigation against a debt collection group. These were debt collectors who we allege were calling people, threatening them with arrests, threatening them with lawsuits, just generally harassing people, trying to get them to pay debts. Some of these consumers didn't even owe the debts, or the debts had been paid off already, and these debt collectors were still harassing them, which that can be pretty scary. So anyway, so those are some of the cases that I worked on. I also worked on a diet pill case that it was called Lean Spa. It involved affiliate marketers, which are these online marketers that were putting up fake news sites. So have you ever seen a website where it looks like it's news, but it's actually an advertorial? Yeah, so it's that kind of thing. Does anyone here watch Girls? Do you know that show? Anyway, there was this really funny episode where the main character, Hannah, was working on an advertorial, and it was for a bone density drug, and the person she was supposed to be interviewing for this, it's this famous Broadway actress, Patti LuPone, is that the name? And she was interviewing her, and she said, first question was, so how long have you had bone density issues, or how long osteoporosis? How long have you had that? And Patti LuPone said, I don't have osteoporosis. What are you talking about? And it turned into, well, if you did have osteoporosis, then how long would have that been? And it was just this whole farce, and it was a real interesting critique of the advertorial world. But yes, there are a lot of instances where people were putting up fake news sites, and I think since the FTC cracked down on this, you see less of it. But there were studies and news reports that were supposed to look like they were real, telling you about how amazing these various supplements were, but actually they were just ads put out by the company. So I worked on a case like that as well. And that case was one of these $4.99 free trial things that got people enrolled in a continuity program. So that's me, and now I'd like to know a little bit about you guys and how you use technology and what kind of commerce you're engaging in online. So first of all, does everybody here have an iPhone or a smartphone? That's kind of weird. So that's, most of us do. And is everybody on Facebook? Okay. And do people do online banking? It's so convenient, right? And what about online payments, like through PayPal or Venmo or anything else? Yeah, we've all paid our friends via PayPal. How about online shopping? One of my personal favorite uses of the internet. And anybody file their taxes via TurboTax or anything else online? No, you guys write it out and send it in. I can't believe that. Anyway, I use TurboTax. And then how many of you are working while you're going to school? Yeah, it's not easy, right? But are you working at places that accept credit card for any products or services? Yep, okay, so you know how many credit cards you see each day and how many transactions are going through. So Today we're going to talk about privacy, data breaches, what people do with stolen information. So, when you're working in a place that accepts credit cards and you see how many transactions are run through, you can really understand the importance of data security. Or if you're online shopping, and we don't usually think twice before we put our information in and we click confirm, and we're just so excited to get our Fabletics gear or whatever we're going to get. I did my first order a few weeks ago. I'm very happy with it. But anyway, we don't think twice about it, and it's something that we take for granted, that there's data security when we're doing our online transactions. But the fact of the matter is that some companies, even some big companies that you would expect to know better, have not engaged in proper data security. And when that happens, it makes all of us vulnerable and at risk. So anyway, I'm happy to hear that you're all connected as I am and can relate to this topic then. Okay, so the FTC has been involved in privacy long before people were using the internet. As I mentioned, we have this do not call registry, which if you guys are not already signed up for, you should be. We also take complaints regarding robocalls. Robocalls are when your phone rings and you pick up and it's an annoying recording telling you that you can refinance your mortgage or whatever, and you're thinking, I don't even own a home, I don't have a mortgage, why are you calling me? Well, they've gotten just tons of phone numbers and they're calling everybody with this annoying recording. And then we also are very interested in dealing with leads. Leads are, there are these companies called lead generator companies that are generating leads, which are basically phone numbers or email addresses and names and sometimes other basic information about people that are then sold to companies so that they can try to market products to you. For example, in the case that I worked on involving the medical discount card, the bogus health insurance, basically there were these lead generating companies that set up these websites that said, are you looking for health insurance? We can give you a free quote. And what you would need to do to get the free quote, of course, is put in your phone number and answer some basic questions about yourself. Do you have a pre-existing condition? Are you within this age range? Do you currently have insurance? Are you unable to get insurance because of financial reasons or because of your pre-existing condition? And once they were able to categorize you in certain ways, then and get your email address or your phone number, then that you became a lead, and that was something that companies could then use to target you, knowing that you were looking for some kind of health insurance and maybe not able to get it, and therefore might fall victim to a medical discount card scam. Another type of lead that we see a lot is payday loan leads. So do you guys know what payday loans are? It's something that hopefully none of you ever have to take out. They're generally very high interest rate loans. They're actually illegal in New York, so you probably won't see them. But what happens is that there are people who are in hard times, and they just need a short-term loan to get them to their payday. And so these loans are given at very high interest rates generally, and they're just for a very, very short period of time. If people fail to pay them back, then you end up having to pay a lot more than you really bargained for. But what we see with payday loan leads is there are people who will go online looking for ways to get some short-term cash, and they'll fill out a form that says, would you like to be pre-approved for a loan? And they don't even know what kind of loan they're even looking at, but they fill out some information about themselves, about how much money they're looking to borrow. They give their name or their phone number, and then sure enough, that information turns into a lead, and it can be passed on to either real lenders who will try to extend credit to these people, or unfortunately, it can turn into what we call phantom debt, where there will be people who purchase these leads, and then they just call and they harass people about about debts that never even existed. So, we at the FTC are very, very concerned about leads and lead generators and making sure that that this area is not something that's used to abuse people. Okay, so why do we care so much about privacy and data security? We want to stop information practices that harm consumers, and we want to do it without restricting the free flow of information that benefits consumers. So basically, we want to be able to allow you to have an online transaction that is convenient. That people want me. I'm a 7.5-month pregnant woman who also is a mom of a toddler. If I need some baby bottles, I can't be going out in the middle of the day doing it. I need to be able to do that online and have that delivered to my apartment 2 days later. And so, we want to make sure that consumers are able to have these conveniences, able to have that benefit, but without the potential harm that can go with it. So what kind of harm am I talking about? Well, the main kind of harm is identity theft. And this was, as I mentioned, was the topic last time I came here. And identity theft is the #1 consumer complaint year after year after year. It affects so many people. I have been a victim of identity theft. Some people here, last time I was here, spoke very openly about their identity theft issues. And it is a real pain. You generally you don't lose any money, but it is such an inconvenience. And it can be very embarrassing when you go to the grocery store and your credit card is denied because somebody else has run up some charges. It's just super annoying. So if you've been the victim of identity theft, or if you want to learn more, please go to www.identitytheft.com. There's a lot of resources there. You can also check to make sure you've not been a victim of identity theft by checking your credit report every year. Every year, the 3 major credit reporting agencies, Equifax, TransUnion, and what's the name of the third? Thank you, Experian. The 3 major credit reporting agencies have to give you a free credit report each year, and you can get that by going to annualcreditreport.com. Another way that people fall victim, or something that can happen as a result of identity theft, is people can file bogus tax returns, and that is not fun. If you are expecting a big refund, you go to file your taxes, turns out somebody has already used your information, your social security number, filed taxes in your name, and taken the nice refund that you were expecting to get. So that's one reason we are very, very concerned about data security. We don't want people to be a victim of identity theft. What are some other reasons we care about privacy and data security? Because sometimes people are engaging in very private things on the internet. And I'm sure you've all heard about and read about and maybe laughed about the Ashley Madison scandal. I love this particular one. I actually just took this screenshot from their homepage yesterday, and I think it's so funny that underneath the picture of the woman shushing is a little symbol that says Trusted Security Award, 100% discreet service, and SSL secure site. So their information, as many of you know, was hacked and then leaked. And it turned out that they did not follow a lot of data security protocols that they should have. One thing that they didn't do is they didn't really authenticate emails. So you could sign up for Ashley Madison using an email address and making up a password, but they never sent you an email at that email address that then made you click on the link and then confirm that you were signing up. So I actually have a friend whose email address is linked to an Ashley Madison profile, and he's so lucky because it's he was dating his now wife when it first happened, and he thought it was a joke that she signed him up for some free trial or something, and he tried to get the emails to stop, but he couldn't, because it was one of these emails that says you can't reply and just directing him to log in. He couldn't log in to change anything because he didn't have the password because he didn't set it up. But anyway, now he found out who, because of the hackers, he found out who had used his email address and decided to send that guy a nice letter. But anyway, another interesting thing about Ashley Madison is that they had an extra fee that people could pay that supposedly would guarantee that all the information was deleted. And what we learned after the hack is that that actually didn't happen. So they told consumers that if you wanted to make sure that all records were burned forever and you could never be discovered, pay this extra $30 or whatever, and that didn't happen. So the reason I wanted to mention that is because you may wonder what kind of security is required. Well, what the FTC requires is what we call reasonable security. And reasonable security means two things. There's like an absolute floor in terms of what kind of security you need to have. But it also depends on what kind of information you're collecting. So if you're collecting social security numbers linked with names and addresses and credit card numbers, financial information, maybe bank account numbers, that is all the most sensitive consumer information you could collect. Also, health information is very sensitive. So the more sensitive the information, the higher our requirements are. So that's one aspect of it. If all you're doing is, I order milk and meat from this company that comes and delivers this really fresh stuff from farms, but they don't have any payment information there. So all it is my name and then what kind of milk and meat I want to order. So that company would not be held to as high a standard because they're not collecting my social security information, they're not collecting my health information, they're not collecting any financial information. So, yes, I have to have a member login ID and a password to get in, but if there were a data breach there, it wouldn't be a big deal. So if they didn't have proper firewalls or whatnot, it's not the end of the world. So, depending on, it's kind of a sliding scale. The more sensitive information you collect, the higher the data security requirements are. Now, the second part of it is you have to provide as much security as you promise. So in the case of a company like Ashley Madison that told people, if you pay this extra $30 fee, then everything's going to be deleted, well, guess what? We're going to hold you to that standard. So anyway, that's why I love this example. And just so you know, the reason why I kind of talk to you guys as if you're businesses is because you're here as part of the business society, and I assume that in not too long, those of you who are not already working will be working. And I can tell you that in a lot of small businesses, people who have set up the companies years ago and maybe are not as familiar with emerging technologies, they're not really thinking about these things. And so we're asking the younger generation to kind of look out for people. And when you go and you start your job, or if you're already working and you go to work, and you might want to say to your employer, like, hey, I'm not sure that we should be using the same password as the login name to get into all this sensitive information, or maybe we should encrypt this, or if we're working in a storefront that has customers coming in, then that wireless network should be password protected so that people can't get in and get this information. So that's why I'm kind of saying like what you're required to do, because I see you guys as all probably going into business if you're not already working, and being people who can really influence the folks you work for and talk about these very important issues. Okay, so why is information important to business? Information security important to businesses? Because the amount of data that we capture doubles every 12 to 18 months. So we're kind of at this point where we're able to capture and store so much information, and people don't always know how to dispose of it or to get rid of it. Like, for example, Ashley Madison might have thought that they were getting rid of, all these email accounts when people asked to be deleted, but clearly they didn't do that. So it's really important to think about how we can either collect less information from consumers or find ways to either not store it or store it in a sensitive way and dispose of it properly. And so the reason it's important also is because we're concerned about ID theft or other harm, and that really harms businesses. And the reason it harms businesses is because customers are saying that they care about this. 1 in 5 people has been a victim of ID theft. 85% of people say that their personally identifiable information, what we call PII in the industry, is very important to them. And 91% of people are concerned that their data may be stolen. Have people seen, just in the last few days, there have been all these Facebook status updates where people say, I do not consent to Facebook taking my information. And anyway, that was largely a hoax, but it's something that people care about. People care about their privacy. People care about having some ownership of what they're doing online, of the pictures that they're putting online. And consumers are telling people that they care about privacy. And so because it matters to customers, it's got to matter to businesses. And it needs to matter to businesses because breaches happen a lot. Small businesses say that half of them have been subject to breaches in the last year. For multinational corporations, 86% within the last 3 years. Do you guys all remember the Target hack that happened, the Target breach? That affected a lot of people, and it really affected Target, the company. There was a huge drop in stock price because there was a concern that there wasn't integrity in the information being stored by the company. So lots of studies show that there were huge numbers of breaches, and whether or not that results in identity theft, there's the fear that it's going to. I personally may have a reason to be concerned about this because, as I mentioned, I work for the federal government, and you've all probably heard about the OPM breach, the Office of Personnel Management, that was hacked by, we believe, Chinese hackers, and all of our sensitive information has been stolen, and that's really terrible for us as individuals, and it's very terrible for our nation because we have to be concerned about another country learning about anyone's potential vulnerabilities, if you will. So it's a big deal. So anyway, what I tell people when I go and talk about cybersecurity is do as I say, not as the government did, because unfortunately, anyone can be subject to a breach. So what does a breach cost to businesses? It's very, very expensive, which is just amazing because the ability to take inexpensive security measures that are pretty good, it's out there. You can now protect yourself pretty cheaply, but a lot of companies just aren't staying on top of things. And so there's the cost of discovering the breach, of responding to the breach, of providing notice to the customers. And so that's estimated at $50 per record, so per file that's taken. There's the lost employee productivity, so employees having to spend all this time to deal with the breach, and that's estimated to be $30 per record. Then you have lost customers. As I mentioned, after that huge Target data breach, there were a lot of consumers who didn't want to shop at Target anymore because they were concerned that they would be victims of a data breach. So that's expected to be about $98 per record. And then there's other intangibles. I think stock price is pretty tangible, but it's just that you can't link it directly to that necessarily. There's reputation and more. And so the bottom line is, if you have a breach that compromises 10,000 records, you can expect it to cost a company between $1 and $3 million. So that's no joke. I mean, that's enough to put some companies out of the business. Okay, so what does that mean for us? Well, as I mentioned, consumers care a lot about this issue. They care about their privacy. They care about data security. We're talking about a lot of money here. The problem just keeps getting worse and worse. And there's constantly emerging technologies, both good technologies that can help prevent breaches, but there's also emerging hacker technology, and people are always finding new ways to get in and breach security. So businesses and governments, particularly the OPM, need to do better to protect consumer information. So there are existing laws that require businesses to implement security measures that are reasonable and appropriate under the circumstances. So as I mentioned, it's a sliding scale. The more sensitive information that's collected, the more security measures they need to take. There's also a requirement that consumers be notified in the event of a data breach. And information that has to be protected is stuff like social security numbers, account information, information from credit reports. Legal standards, there are a lot of different laws covering this. This is just a few examples. There's the Federal Trade Commission Act. We enforce data security issues under the unfairness prong of Section 5 of the FTC Act. We also will go after deceptive privacy policies. So to the extent that there's a privacy policy that's out there and the company doesn't actually follow or give you the level of privacy that they tell you they're giving you, then we would use the deceptive practices portion of the FTC Act to enforce that. There's the Fair Credit Reporting Act. Do you guys know about that? The Fair Credit Reporting Act is basically a rule that restricts the use of credit information. And so if you apply for a credit card, for example, there's going to be a credit report that's run on you, right? And that credit report is going to be provided to the credit card company or to the issuing bank. And that company will decide whether or not to issue credit to you. In the event that you are declined, and it's based on information in your credit report, then that needs to be disclosed to you. That's one of the requirements of the Fair Credit Reporting Act. And the reason is because there can be things that are wrong on a credit report. For example, after I had my identity stolen, there was a lot of information on my credit report that was wrong, and consumers need to be notified of that so that they have the opportunity to clean up any inaccuracies or discrepancies there. There's the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, the FTC disposal rule, which talks about how to properly dispose of information. There's other federal laws. HIPAA governs health records. There's DPPA, FERPA, and state laws. And I'm not going to get into everything. But I will tell you a little bit about Coppa, which is the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act. And this is aimed at kids because, you know, everybody's playing games on apps and doing things on mobile phones. And there were issues with children's apps and people collecting information about kids, which we didn't want. So there are changes that are in effect. We are, like for example, personal information about a child includes photos, video or audio of child, screen name, IDs. We're very concerned about protection of children because they may not be thinking about privacy issues the way their parents are. Okay, so as I mentioned, we have used Section 5 of the FTC Act to enforce privacy and data security. And we require reasonable procedures to protect information, and we also require that companies live up to the promises that they make. So our philosophy is that information security is an ongoing process. You can't just set up your website, put in reasonable security practices, and then forget about it. As you learn about new types of scams and new types of hacks and new types of malware, you've got to constantly be reevaluating data security practices and make sure that the company's practices are up to date. It has to be reasonable in light of the circumstances. As I mentioned, that sliding scale. The more sensitive information you take, the more you need to protect it. And this is interesting. A breach does not necessarily show that the company didn't have reasonable security measures. So we don't only go after companies that have been victims of breaches. There are some companies that we go after where there hasn't been a breach and there hasn't been any real consumer harm. But if we become aware of lax security measures, then we will go after them. Oops. Okay, so the Fair Credit Reporting Act, which I talked about briefly, it requires consumer reporting agencies to know their consumers and use reasonable procedures to allow access to consumer reports only to legitimate users. Now, what's interesting is that consumer reporting agencies is a defined term that doesn't just include Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. It also includes other companies, and there was an interesting case against Spokio. Do you guys know what Spokio is? It's this website that collects information about people that it gathers from online sources. And Spokio was like a data aggregator that then offered profiles to employment agencies, human resources staffing firms, and recruiters. And it would have information such as your name, your address, your online activity, your hobbies, pictures you've posted, anything that you had done publicly. And then it was marketing those specifically to recruiters. They set up a URL that was like www.spokio.com/HR. And they had bought advertising terms that recruiters and employment agencies, temp agencies would be attracted to, so that they would market to those particular companies. And then the problem there is that people were making employment decisions based on the information they saw. In fact, one of the taglines that Spokio was using was "Go beyond the resume," saying, you can learn a lot about these job candidates just from what they've put online, and we'll aggregate all this and show you what this candidate is really about. And so then people were having adverse employment consequences and not being told about that, which is a violation of the FCRA. So anyway, that's one interesting Credit Reporting Act case. Okay, so there's just some requirements. A business has to provide consumers with information about a fraud. They have to verify the identity of any applicants who have fraud alerts on their credit report profiles. They can't sell or collect on a fraudulent debt, and they can't report a fraudulent debt to the credit bureaus. And the credit bureaus are those three major credit reporting agencies that I mentioned. Okay, I'm taking too long, so I'm going to skip through some of these things. But these rules basically, these laws basically are various ways that the government enforces security rules. So, information security is currently a major FTC priority. We have brought a lot of cases against some of the companies whose logos are displayed here. I'll talk to you about a few of them, but I unfortunately will not have time to get into all of them. So as I mentioned, we have brought cases against companies who have misrepresented their security procedures or their privacy policies. We have brought cases regarding wireless vulnerabilities. So BJ's Wholesale Club, Dave & Buster's, those those places where you can go and play all the video games and carnival games and eat pizza and that sort of thing. They had wireless vulnerabilities where there were easy to guess passwords or no passwords, and there was basically open access to tons of credit card information. Then this company, Guidance Software, had vulnerabilities to command injection attacks. That's a very particular type of hack. And what's interesting about the Guidance Software case is Guidance Software sold software and related materials to customers who would use this software to investigate and respond to computer breaches and other security incidents. So this was a company that was actually selling software related to security breaches, and somehow they themselves were vulnerable to these particular command injection attacks. So that was one issue. We have brought cases about data retention issues. Card Systems was the big case that we brought. Card Systems was a case where the company provided merchants with products and services used in authorization processing, which is the process of approving credit card and debit card purchases. And they were just keeping too much information and storing it improperly. Then there was the failure to authenticate prospective customers, and this was a case involving ChoicePoint. This was an FCRA case. And in this one, they were obtaining and selling to businesses personal information of consumers, including names and social security numbers, birth dates, employment information, and credit histories. And in this case, they didn't monitor their application procedures for their prospective customers well enough, and they were selling this information to bogus companies that were using commercial mail receiving, like a post office Dropbox kind of things. So if you use a UPS store address or a Regis virtual office or these kinds of phony addresses, they were selling to companies that were using those types of things, not real companies. And so it was just dangerous to be providing that kind of information to bogus companies. And then another case involved inadequate employee training, and this was a case against Eli Lilly. Eli Lilly is the maker of Prozac, the antidepressant, and this was a case that spawned from an email that an Eli Lilly employee sent to 699 people that disclosed the email addresses of people who had subscribed to this auto reminder kind of thing to remind people to take their medication or remind people to get a refill. So have you ever gotten an email where somebody really should have BCC'd everybody, but instead they just wrote to? So imagine that sort of thing happening, but now all of a sudden 699 people all know the email addresses of everybody else who is taking Prozac and wanting to be reminded to take their meds or to refill them. So that's pretty sensitive information. So we brought an action against Eli Lilly based on that. Then there are other vulnerabilities, and these are important for businesses and consumers alike. Passwords are the keys. There should be double-factor authentication. Double-factor authentication is we require people to, for example, have an email confirmation where you would receive an email and then have to click on a link and use that to then finalize the setup. And passwords should be required to be strong. Do you guys know what a strong password is versus a weak one? So a weak password would be like exactly the same as your login name or your name or something like that, something that's easy to guess. A strong password is one that has a combination of capital letters, lowercase letters, numbers, other characters, that sort of thing. We are concerned about companies not installing patches when there's a known vulnerability. Do you guys know what patches are? So if you have some kind of, say, Norton antivirus or some other kind of antivirus software, Generally, hackers will find ways to get around this, and so software companies put out what's called patches that are like Band-Aids to fix the little problems where there could be breaches. And so companies need to stay on top of the patches and make sure that they install them in a timely way. Everybody needs to be concerned about tech support scams. Has anybody heard about these where were you a victim of it, or?
No, but it comes up on my laptop, like a MacBook Keeper, and it's like, that's fake. It's like tech support's like, you can sign up for it, but it's fake.
Right, so that's exactly it. You'll get a pop-up that tells you that there's some kind of malware or some kind of virus that's trying to attack your computer. And so a lot of people will see that and they'll just click on it. Well, guess what? A lot of times that's a scam. And that when you click on it, that's when the malware will be installed. Or that's when somebody will be able to remote into your computer and then do things like record keystrokes or do other things that would give them access to your information. Recording keystrokes is where what you type is being recorded. So then when you go online and you want to do your city banking online and pay all your bills, somebody can be basically watching what you're doing, and that's pretty scary to think about. Then there's spear phishing attacks. That's when it's a targeted attack where there's an email. Oftentimes it looks like it's coming from somebody you know, and all it requires is that you click on a link and then boom, everything's open. So we have brought cases under the Unfairness Doctrine, as I mentioned, over data security practices, saying that when there's inadequate safeguards, then there's this likelihood of causing consumer harm without any countervailing benefits. Okay, I don't have time to go over all of these key principles, so I'm just going to mention them briefly. But if this is something that people are interested in, I can order these publications for you and maybe have Linda get them. It's this guide called Protecting Personal Information, a guide for businesses. I'll talk to Linda about that, or maybe I can find out from you guys if you're interested in any of these kinds of pamphlets. Unfortunately, I think I have to order them in hundreds, so we'll talk about that. That's why I didn't bring them today. So what businesses need to do is take stock of the information they're collecting, scale down, only collect what they need, lock it up, make sure that what they do collect is kept securely, pitch it, meaning discard it properly, and plan ahead. If you are a victim of a data breach, because so many companies are, then you need to plan accordingly, have a protocol in place so that you know how you're going to notify people, you know who's going to be in charge to deal with it, that sort of thing. So I'm going to skip through these. Okay, so how is data obtained other than through security breaches? There are situations where a privacy policy will say that data is going to be shared indiscriminately. So does anybody here read terms and conditions and privacy policies and that kind of stuff? I have to admit, I should because I know better, but even I generally just click through these kinds of things. But there are privacy policies out there that will tell you that they're going to sell your information or they're going to share the information. So there's a lot of times where information isn't stolen, it's just been provided by you, and that information has been freely given, and nobody's broken any laws because they told you they were going to give it up. So consider looking at some of these privacy policies. Then there's a situation where scammers are tricking you into providing information. Some of those can be like the lead generation websites and that kind of thing. And then people seem to give a lot of information if they think they can win something. So we had a case against a company that was texting people saying that they won a $1,000 gift card to Walmart or to any other Best Buy, big box stores kind of thing. And all you had to do was verify your information. And so people were giving tons of information, their name, their address, their social security number. People hear hear that they've won $1,000, and they're pretty excited about that, and they're willing to give up information. But of course, it was a scam, and there was no gift card, and all people did was give up valuable information. So the name of that case was FTC v. Equinity Interactive LLC. So what do these companies do with the data? They are using it generally to either sell leads, or sometimes they're just selling data dumps, like that you can buy on, you guys have heard of Silk Road, right? Silk Road is like, it's the digital underground is what I call it. It's a place you can go online. Now, don't everybody go on after I tell you about it, but Silk Road, there's actually a really interesting article, I think it was a 3-part article in Vice magazine or Vice Online about Silk Road. It was started by this guy who was a computer programmer and a hardcore libertarian and recreational drug user who really felt that the government should be getting out of drug regulation, and that people should be able to take ecstasy whenever they wanted and to get it, and he wanted to find a secure way to have a marketplace for this. And so Silk Road is basically the Craigslist of illegal activities. So anything, you go on Craigslist to get a roommate, you go on Silk Road to get a prostitute. Think of it like that, okay? So Silk Road turned into crazy stuff, like people were hiring hits, meaning trying to kill people, anything. So one thing that you can buy on Silk Road is you can buy data dumps of credit card files. So hackers will do a security breach, they'll get in, collect tons of credit card information, and then they will sell that information on Silk Road. So anyway, it's also called the dark web, is what it's called.
I thought it was closed down.
It may have been closed down because the founder was arrested, and leading up to that arrest is what this Vice article was all about. But there are other, Silk Road is the most famous, but there are plenty of other dark web websites. So anyway, I encourage everybody to go to Vice and read about the Silk Road stuff, because it's really fascinating. But anyway, so that's why we are concerned about data security, is because it's just so easy for hackers to get at this information if there isn't proper security, and it's also so easy for them to monetize it by selling your information. One type of lead is to get people to apply for credit cards. When I was in college, I remember there was always the free t-shirt offer, and it was like, apply for this credit card and you get a free t-shirt. And in retrospect, I can't believe anybody fell for this, but this was something that people wanted to do. And the idea is that if you can extend credit to people, then they're going to be paying the interest and penalties and whatnot. Another thing, like we talked about, the bogus tax returns. People will use your information to file a tax return in your name and under your social security number and take a return. Then there's the payday loan leads. You have to worry about getting harassed about loans that may or may not exist. Phantom debt, as I mentioned, is when the debt was never real. It's made up debt and you're just getting harassed until you pay it. And then there are other online bogus forms, lead generation forms, that you have to be concerned about. FTC v. AccuSearch was a privacy case that we brought where AccuSearch Inc. was selling unlisted phone numbers. And so if there were stalkers, for example, who wanted to harass somebody and that person changed their number to an unlisted number, they could pay AccuSearch and get that information. This is particularly creepy, this case. Now I'm just telling you examples of our privacy cases. Aaron's Inc. was this rent-to-own computer store, and you could rent a PC, and what you didn't know is that the little camera that's on top of the monitor that came with it could record everything, and not just when you hit record. They had control over looking out of your screen and taking pictures. And you can only imagine some of the pictures they took. They had pictures of people changing. They had pictures of people involved in intimate activities. They had some pretty private stuff there. They also recorded keystrokes, which, as I mentioned, that's when it's as if somebody is watching you and seeing what you are typing in and getting access to all of your login and password information. And of course, the reason this is a problem is because they didn't tell people they were doing this. They were renting the computer, and I guess they wanted to be able to know where the computer was and find info on people to get them to make sure they made their payments or gave it back, and that's how they chose to do it, and that was illegal. So we sued them. So we are concerned about extortion. I've talked about ID theft. I've talked about private information, like Ashley Madison type of information getting out there. We're also concerned about people putting up embarrassing information and charging you to remove it. The FTC recently brought a case called jerk.com, which was really interesting. It was this website that basically you could report somebody as being a jerk, and then they would have to pay to have their name removed from this jerk list. So that's a pretty interesting case, I think. And then maybe you guys have heard about this horrible, horrible thing out there called revenge porn, but there are websites that are set up that are specifically places where people can put inappropriate photos that may have been sent to them by an ex-girlfriend or ex-boyfriend, and then it's available for all to see. So we're concerned about situations where people are either being exposed or where there's extortion and people are being charged money to have to take some pictures down. Okay, so I feel like I need to skip through some things because I've already been talking for nearly an hour, and I want to make sure we have enough time for questions. So I'm going to skip some of this. We talked about tech support scams. Okay, so we also have another publication that I think would be useful if anyone's interested in the subject. It's called, we have more at ftc.gov/privacy. And I wanted to quickly now just show you some of the resources we have available. Okay. So if you go to ftc.gov and you go to tips and advice, we have the Business Center here, and there's a link that goes to privacy and security, and it talks about different rules and requirements that we have. And maybe more interesting to you is if you go to tips and advice for consumers, we have a privacy and identity tab here. And if you are the victim of identity theft, you can click on Recover from Identity Theft. This, I think, everybody should be aware of, limiting unwanted calls and emails. There are all of these things that you can do to stop unsolicited mail, phone calls, email. I need to do this again, actually. It'll tell you how to report scams, that kind of stuff. Then there's a whole section on computer security, talking about free security scams, which is a lot of these tech support scams, generally talking about computer security, cookies. Do you guys all know what cookies are? So anyway, there's a lot of information here. Also, disposing of old computers. If you there was this terrible scam where all these people who donated computers had their identities stolen because they weren't wiping the hard drives before turning them over. So you have to be concerned about that. This talks about peer-to-peer file sharing risks, phishing scams, Anyway, there's a lot of information here, and I really encourage you all to go to our website and to take a look at some of these things, because it's just amazing and alarming to see how frequent data breaches are. And because we do so much online and have such sensitive information passed over the internet, we really need to think about these issues. So do you guys have any questions for me about data security or privacy issues?
Just in relation to the small businesses and that they're not up to spending that much money on security, does the FTC hold workshops for small businesses so that they may become more aware of issues they need to deal with?
We do. The question was whether the FTC has workshops for businesses so that they know, for small businesses, so that they have an understanding of what's required of them. For example, here on our main webpage, we've got a link to PrivacyCon. This is going to be in January in DC, and it's really going to be a whole convention about privacy. And we have, under tips and advice, we have this business center here, and we've got privacy and security, and this has a ton of information for small businesses about what's required of them. We also have a brochure, which I just brought one copy that I'll leave with you, called Start with Security, a guide for businesses. And you can order more of these for free, and I encourage everyone to look at it. And so, yes, we have a lot of educational resources for businesses. We feel like at the FTC, we need to educate consumers, and we also need to educate businesses, because consumers need to be aware of what they're getting into, and there are issues like, I talked about unfairness, where there's it's traps that consumers can't avoid. You don't see them. It's not like deception, where maybe if you'd taken a closer look or looked at the fine print, you would have learned what was happening to you. When it comes, when it comes to unfairness, there's a lot of things that consumers don't have any control over. So it's very important to us that we advise small businesses and make sure we have resources available to them. Any other questions? You can ignore it. You can file a complaint with the FTC. So if you go to ftc.gov/complaint, file a complaint, and then next time you get a call, let them know that you filed a complaint with the FTC.
I told them, I said, you know what, we can put in with the police, we can put it in a 3-way conference. You can tell them whatever information you have, and we can go forward from there.
The problem is that the police often don't do anything about these things.
Yeah.
Well, because it's not an immediate threat. Somebody else is getting beat up at the same time, so it's...
They're like, if somebody is coming at your door and knocking the door, and unless you get killed, we are not
Right. So the police are more interested in avoiding imminent harm, and so if there's a real threat of physical force, or like the police told you, if somebody's at your door, then that's when they want to get involved. But I think that generally speaking, it's going to be more effective for you to contact the Federal Trade Commission and file a complaint. And so if you go to www.ftc.gov, you'll get to this website, which is the Complaint Assistant, and you can select a category here. And let's see, credit and debit. So debt, collection practices of a company. So you can put in information here about a complaint against a debt collection company. Give us as much information as you can, the phone number they called from, the names of the companies they're using, what they said to you exactly, claiming to be the IRS, whatnot. As I mentioned, I'm currently involved in an active litigation against a debt collection company, or actually several debt collection companies, and they did pretend to be the IRS. In fact, one of the names was International Recovery Service, so that they could use the acronym IRS. And one of our allegations against them is that they were claiming government affiliation when they, of course, were not affiliated with the government. And so in that case, before we filed the lawsuit, we were aware of more than 1,100 consumer complaints against these companies. Since filing the lawsuit, we've learned of even more. So, you know, what happens is there are a lot of these debt collection companies that are out there, and the best thing you can do is file a complaint with the FTC, because when enough complaints are filed, we know that it's time to take action, and we have the evidence that we need to go after these companies. So please, instead of calling the police, they're likely not going to help you unless there's a real threat of physical force being used against you. So contact the FTC and contact also the Better Business Bureau and let them know. And then next time you get a debt collection call, let them know that you've already filed a complaint with the FTC and you've already filed a complaint with the Better Business Bureau. And these people hopefully won't want to mess with you anymore because they know that they could get caught if they do.
Same thing is with Con Edison calls, where they pretend to be Con Edison and your electricity bill you didn't pay last month and we're going to cut it within 1 day or so. You have to go pay right now and all that stuff.
Same type of scam. If you know you paid your Con Ed bill and you're hearing these kinds of
I
things.
just asked him, like, what kind of company Con Ed would call me personally and tell me that you didn't pay your bill?
Right.
You had to just cut the electricity.
Yeah. So yeah, make sure you file complaints with the FTC, but your local precinct is probably not going to be able to do much to help you there. Does anyone else have any questions? Okay, well listen, thank you all. I really appreciate it. I'll give the mic back to Linda, but I really appreciate you all coming and hearing me out. And if you have any questions, please go to the FTC's website. We have a lot of resources available.
Okay. Thank you so much, Karen, for a lot of information I didn't know before. Those of you who have the attendance sheet, please sign it and make sure I get it. And again, thank you so much.
Thank you.